Okay, so let's get into some of the new Moto 902 features. These are all some cool new things that were free with the Moto upgrade. And what I want to do is just show you these in the next series of videos. And then we're going to get back to doing some other things like particles and dynamics. So the first thing I'm going to show you is camera matching. Now, camera matching is a little bit different than what you might be used to in terms of a background image. So if you select the camera, and you come down and take a look at the camera view tab, you'll see that there's a new background image. Now that's what we're going to use, but that's a little bit different than a background item. So for instance, if I take, let's say, this grass tile image and I drop it into my view, notice that I've got a backdrop item that automatically adds. And that's great, and I can use that for drawing. I can have a blueprint of a car. I can put that on the X, Y, or Z, draw over it, trace it, use it as a background. However, when I go to render, that's not going to be there. It's just a reference. Okay, so what we're going to do is a little different than that. It's a good bit different than that, in fact. So we're going to jump over here to the Setup tab, okay, and we're going to make sure that with the camera selected, we are in the Camera View tab. And for background image, we're going to select that. We're not going to choose grass. We're actually going to load the kitchen image. And this is part of your courseware downloads. Okay. Now, in order to see this, if you don't see this, make sure that your view is set to render camera up at the top. It's probably set to perspective by default. So make sure you're set to render camera. And what you can see here is your work plane and grid all kind of aligned like they are, X, Y, and Z. And basically what would happen is I go and I put an object in the scene. Well, it's going to be kind of hard to line that up. It's okay. It's just going to be an object floating over an image. So what we want to do is use the camera matching so that our camera is perfectly aligned to the size, scale, resolution of this image. It's really easy to do. So here in the camera view, first thing we're going to do is hit set resolution from clip. And notice that the whole perspective changes just a little bit. What that does is automatically turns this on. It overrides the resolution that's existing with your camera and changes it to the resolution of this image. It's great, especially if you're working with video. Okay, now you can adjust this, of course, turn that off if you want, but we're going to keep it out for right now. Next thing we want to do is match to the background. So we're going to click that button. Well, it doesn't look like much happens. However, that actually turned on our tool. So let's go over here to Tool Properties. And again, we're in the Setup tab. So make sure you're in Tool Properties. You see Axis 1 and Axis 2. So in order for this to properly work and properly align, you want to have two lines drawn for your Axis 1 and for Axis 2. And in this case, we're going to choose the most perpendicular. Basically, give the most information we can to the image. And in this case, I've got pretty good X and pretty good Z working here in this image. So with the X for number 1, we're just going to click, and then we're going to drag out, and we're just going to line that up, and I'm going to use the edge of the counter. To get a little more precise, you can right-click on this target, and you can actually have a nice little pop-up zoom in to align that even better. So that's number 1. Then we're going to click again, and this will be number 2. And I can just put this anywhere. I'm just going to put it right on the cabinet, or for instance, I could put it up on the ceiling, but I think I'm just going to use a cabinet because these are pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'll put it right at the bottom edge there. Good. Next click, it knows that, okay, I've done 2 for my Axis 1. Next one will automatically be Axis 2, and it's going to be blue, and you'll see it down here. So we're going to put one there, and we're going to put this here. And again, what this is doing, it's telling the image, well, this is our Z-axis alignment, and this is our X-axis alignment, and I'll put one back here. So here's Z again, like that. Right click for precision. So now I've got my 4-axis set up. All I got to do now is hit Set Camera from Matcher. And you'll see that that whole thing aligns. Now that grid and everything else is all aligned to my image. Pretty good perspective match. Camera setup, resolution setup. So now when I place 3D objects, they're going to be very easy to place into this scene. I can go a little bit further and add a length as well. So let's say I know that the height of this window back here is 8 feet. I can click there and drag down, or let's say we go all the way to the ceiling from the floor. And I know that that's 9 feet. We are working in meters, so that's going to be 2.74 meters. Okay, that just helps give a little bit more precision and perspective so that everything matches. Now, the other thing we can do, which we don't really have to worry about here, is a distortion. So if you can see here really, really close, if we shot this and we had a little pinch cushion from our image, from our photograph, you'll see a green line in there. That will help any kind of lens distortion if we had a really serious wide angle. You can see it right there, that green line. Now we really don't here, so we don't need to set that. Okay, but once we have this, let's go ahead and set camera from matcher. Locks it all in. And the other thing I could do is even go and put work plane to match. Showed you earlier. So now if you take a look at the perspective view, you'll see that all of that is lined up. You can see the camera. It's kind of in an odd place now, but that's because it's all using the position of the image to line everything up. So what does that mean? Well, you can always turn this back on. Just adjust those markers if you want. But what we're going to do now is put an object in there. So let's open up the Model tab. And instead, you know what? I actually want to do this. I want to go here to the Layout tab. And let's come down to, we'll go back up to Meshes, open this up. And what we're going to choose is Interior, Household. And we can choose a vase. We can choose some books, a tea kettle, whatever we want. Let's take this espresso machine, which is kind of nice, and we're going to drag and drop that into the scene. If we go back to the Setup tab, sometimes that might be hard to see based on where it is in the scene and where the camera is. If that happens, you can simply change this to a perspective view or add one to the scene. And notice it's way back here and our camera's here. So we just want to kind of put that in front of the camera just to see it. And then we can go back to our render view. So now, placing this in our scene is not difficult at all. There's no guesswork. And then we'll push this with W, transform. We can rotate it, and now it's perfectly sitting on the counter. Very easy to move. No problem. So you notice that our scale, our perspective, everything's correct to match the image. But here's the one problem. We don't have shadows. We don't have reflections. What do I mean? Let's come over here to render. Let's take a look. Okay, well, yeah, it's just floating there. All the perspective and everything matches very well. You can click in here and actually move this and still adjust it very easily. You can do it down here in a 3D view as well. But while that's great, that allows us to really place that well, it doesn't look like it's part of the scene. So there's a couple more things you need to do. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to Model, hold the Shift key in the Basic tab, and add a flat plane. Okay, and now you can do this for any kind of outdoor image, whatever you like. I'm going to scale up the flat plane, and I'm just going to move it over here like this. And sometimes in order to see this, I'll go to Polygon View, Shift D, let's just subdivide this a little bit. Just gives us a little more grid to see than just a flat outline. All right, so what I want to do with this is press M and call this Shadow. And let's place this down underneath, like that. And then because we have our camera matching, this won't be that hard to match either. It's not necessary to really move it around too much because what we're going to do to it doesn't really affect the rest of the scene too well. So that's okay. But I just want to make sure that's just right under there, which it is. Okay, so here in the shader tree for shadow, what we want to do is add under special a shader. Okay, we have our base shader here. It's the same thing. Okay, controlling our visibility, our camera, everything else. This one's going to have its own shader, and in that case, we're going to make the alpha type shadow catcher. All right, and basically what I'm telling that is only be a shadow. Now, right here, I'm still seeing the whole object. Well, what I need to do is make sure that this goes above our base shader. And what happens when I do that is that this shader now is in control and this shader is not, because the render feeds up. Everything feeds up to the render, I should say, in the shader tree. But now notice that I've got a nice little shadow under there and it looks a lot more realistic. So let me turn it off. Let's just turn the whole object off. Or just make it disappear. Let's do that. See that? A little bit of difference. I got a little reflection, a little bit of shadow, and it helps. The next thing I need to do is make sure that the lighting matches. Really, it's it's almost more important than the camera matching, but I shouldn't say that. They're both important. So how do we do that? Well, right now we have this stupid default light on here, right? Yeah, that's fine. Let's turn that off. Okay, well, what's lighting this scene? What's lighting it is our global illumination. But what's in there? Well, nothing really, just a background, just this. This is what's in there. So let's turn that constant, and if I make that, let's say purple, for instance. See, that's what's lighting our scene, global illumination. So when I turn that light off, we're still getting the environment. Well, here's a little trick. Even though this image is just a normal digital image with a camera, it's not a probe image, it's not a high dynamic range image, we can still use it to light our scene. So with that environment material selected, I'm going to select Load Image from the Add Layer dropdown, and I'm going to load that kitchen image into my environment. Okay? So now this image is actually being used to light my scene. Again, the directional light is off. We don't want that. It adds kind of phony artificial light. Now, it still looks a little too bright for me. But one thing we can do is we can make sure that, for instance, depending on your image, you can go to the intensity of the environment. So select the environment, go to intensity. You can crank up that image, and believe it or not, use it to light your scene. Like here it is. I'm just increasing the intensity of the background image in the environment, and that is now adding to that light source because of the global illumination. This image is bright enough where a 1 works. So in this case, I just feel that this object itself is too shiny. But notice what's also cool is that it's reflecting everything properly, because we are taking this same kitchen image and we are wrapping it around the environment. It's not only being a light source, it's also being a reflection source to help add to that realism. So let's select this material button, click on that little coffee pot there, the machine body, and let's take a look at some of the surface settings. So right now this default surface is set to 10% specular. Let's bring that down to 5. Let's bring the Fresnel down to about 30%. Then let's take the roughness and let's bring that up a bit to about 30. So it's not quite as shiny. From there, we've got a reflection amount about 10%. Now this is an older object, right? So what you're seeing here is some old shading models, this reflection and this Fresnel. And by adjusting these, it's going pretty well. We can hit match specular, and that helps a little bit. But let's do something else. Instead of energy conserving, let's go to physically based. This is the new model for Moto 901. All right, and so here, these are going to talk to each other a little bit better. So again, we're going to have a little bit of a lower specular. Our Fresnel is pretty good. We're going to pull down the specular color just a little bit, so it's not quite so shiny. Okay. And from there, the roughness, I think maybe I'm going to bring that up to about 50. And then I'm going to bring my diffuse down maybe to about 65. And what that's going to do is take a little less light from the scene. And from here, we could put a bit of a clear coat on too. Depends on how shiny you want that. But now you can see that it's not quite so clean and shiny. It's a little bit rougher surface. All right, now let's do the same just for the metal real quick, and then we'll move on. So select that. Again, with this material selection up here, we can click right on a material, and then that opens that up for us in the shader tree. Now there's a gradient on here. I'm just going to turn that off. We don't need a gradient. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing. This is way too shiny, so we're going to go 20%, 20%. We're going to bring this specular color down just a bit. And the roughness we're going to increase to about 40 maybe. And then, of course, this reflection we don't want, so we're going to go to physically based. There we go. And then we can bring this back up just a little bit. Okay, so this could have a little bit of tweaking here and there just to give it a little bit better realism. Okay, but again, just working with an existing model and making it match the scene using camera matching, I think we could have a little bit more metallic in there. And the way to make the metallic with this physically based is to have kind of a bright color for your diffuse, but then, or actually I should take that back, you should have a bit of a darker color for your diffuse and then a bit brighter color for your specular. And you get kind of a nice metal. Works pretty well. And if that's not bright enough, then you can increase the Fresnel and decrease or increase the specular, depending on how you want that to look. And the roughness, a higher roughness, of course, is rougher, and a lower roughness is a little bit smoother and shinier. So now we get that same kind of reflective, sort of shiny look, but it's not quite as, glowing as it was before. So you can see that the camera matching really helps us align objects into a scene very easily. This works obviously indoor. A lot of the stuff that's already been out there is only showing outdoor. So that's why I wanted to show an indoor. How easily you can add a shadow map just to put underneath there just for the counter. So this is great if you're doing, let's say, interior architectural renders and you want to add an object into a scene. You want to add a lamp and so on. You can match these lights as well. This also is what this is great for. Not just putting objects in, but putting lights in. I want to match a light in these spots in the ceiling. I can do it very easily simply by just adding a spotlight and lining it up because, well, I've done my camera matching, so that alignment is no different than lining up an object on the counter. So try that out. Some really cool stuff.